I heard them planning my death through the baby monitor I'd bought to listen for my grandson's cries at night. Tuesday, October 15th, 7:43 p.m., while I was downstairs loading the dishwasher with the same blue plates Harold and I had received for our wedding 38 years ago. What you're about to hear isn't just about betrayal. It's about insurance fraud, attempted murder, and how a grandmother's love for technology she barely understood became the thread that unraveled everything. The monitor crackled to life just as I was scraping the remnants of Harold's favorite meatloaf into the garbage disposal. Meatloaf, he couldn't eat anymore, of course, not since the stroke 6 months ago that had left him wheelchair-bound and supposedly barely able to form complete sentences. I'd been making it anyway, partly from habit, mostly from hope. She's getting suspicious. The voice was clear as church bells through the plastic speaker. Harold's voice. Not the slurred, struggling whisper he used when I was in the room, but his old voice. The voice that used to call me sweetheart and tell me I was beautiful even when I was covered in flour from Sunday baking. My hand stilled on the faucet handle. The water kept running, hot steam rising like ghosts between my fingers. "Mom's always been too smart for her own good," came the reply. Kevin's voice. My stepson, Harold's boy from his first marriage, the 28-year-old who'd moved back home 6 months ago to help with Dad's care. The same Kevin who couldn't remember to take out the trash but somehow always remembered when the life insurance premiums were due. I reached over and turned off the water, my movements careful and quiet. 34 years of marriage had taught me when to listen and when to speak. This was definitely a listening moment. The baby monitor had been Kevin's idea, actually. "Mom, Linda," he'd said, using that patronizing tone that made my teeth ache. "You need to be able to hear Dad when you're downstairs. What if he falls out of bed? What if he needs help?" He'd set it up himself, the transmitter on Harold's nightstand, the receiver in the kitchen where I spent most of my time these days, cooking meals for a man who claimed he could barely swallow. Harold's bedroom was directly above the kitchen. I'd never thought about sound traveling the other way. "The policy's worth $500,000 now," Harold continued, and I felt the floor shift beneath my feet like the earth was readjusting itself. "Doubled it last month when she was at her sister's. She signed the papers, but she wasn't really paying attention. You know how she gets with financial stuff. $500,000. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles white against the worn laminate. When had I signed papers? I tried to remember, but the past few months were a blur of doctor appointments, insurance forms, and medications that Harold supposedly needed but never seemed to make him any better. "And you're sure she doesn't suspect anything about the accident scenario?" Kevin's voice carried that particular combination of greed and nervousness that I'd heard in his tone since he was 16 and stealing money from Harold's wallet. Accident scenario. The words hit me like ice water. Nah, she thinks I can barely tie my shoes. Women her age, they want to believe their husbands need them. Makes them feel useful. Harold's laugh was bitter familiar. It was the same laugh he'd used when his first wife had died in what everyone called a tragic slip in the bathtub. The same laugh that had made me feel special when he'd chosen me, a 40-year-old widow with no money and plenty of loneliness. I pressed my back against the refrigerator, its hum vibrating through my sweater. The kitchen felt smaller. Suddenly the walls closing in like the set of a play I'd been performing in without knowing my lines. "So we stick to the plan," Kevin said. "The stairs are perfect. Wood, no carpet, nice and slippery, especially with a little water from a leaky pipe in the upstairs bathroom." My legs nearly gave out. The stairs. Our beautiful oak staircase that Harold had refinished himself when we'd first moved into this house. The same stairs I climbed every night to check on him, to make sure he was comfortable, to adjust his pillows and kiss his forehead like the devoted wife I thought I was. "Thursday night," Harold said. "You'll be here for dinner like always. I'll make sure she goes upstairs first to get my medication. She always does that routine around 9, then the water, the fall, and you call 911. Grieving son trying to save his stepmother. Very touching." Thursday, that was tomorrow. I slid down the refrigerator until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, my legs folded beneath me like a broken doll. The baby monitor continued crackling with the sound of my husband and stepson planning my murder, their voices casual as if they were discussing the weather or what to watch on television. "What about the investigation?" Kevin asked. "Won't they look into it?" She's 64, overweight, on blood pressure medication. Accidents happen to women her age all the time, especially when they're stressed about caring for sick husbands. Harold's voice carried a note of professional satisfaction, like he'd thought this through very carefully. Overweight. The word stung more than the murder plot. I looked down at my body, soft and comfortable in the navy blue cardigan I'd bought at Macy's last spring. Harold used to say I was perfect just the way I was. Apparently, that was before I became worth more dead than alive. The monitor went quiet. I heard footsteps overhead, the creak of floorboards as they moved around Harold's room. My room, too, technically, though I'd been sleeping in the guest bedroom since his stroke, made sharing a bed too difficult. I pulled myself up from the floor, my joints protesting. 64 wasn't old, not really, but sitting on cold kitchen floors made everything ache. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard Harold had loved so much. The tomatoes I'd planted in his honor were still producing red globes hanging heavy on the vine despite the October chill. 3 months ago, I'd been a wife, a caregiver, a woman who made meatloaf and worried about insurance copays and whether Harold was getting enough physical therapy. A woman who thought her biggest problem was learning to use the new smartphone Kevin had given me for emergencies. Now I was a target. I reached for my purse hanging on the hook beside the back door and pulled out the iPhone Kevin had insisted I needed. The same Kevin who was upstairs right now planning my death. I stared at the screen, trying to remember which button opened the recording app he'd shown me last week. "Just in case you want to record Dad's funny stories," he'd said. "For posterity." Posterity. What a joke. My fingers fumbled across the smooth surface. Kevin had been so patient showing me how to swipe and tap and hold. "Technology isn't scary, Mom Linda," he'd said. "It's just different." He was right about that. Technology wasn't scary at all. But family was terrifying. I found the red button and pressed it, watching as the phone began recording the silence of my kitchen. Tomorrow night, they expected me to climb those stairs and die. They expected me to be the trusting wife who never questioned, never investigated, never fought back. They were about to learn something about women my age that Harold had forgotten over the past 6 months of playing invalid. We didn't survive 64 years on this earth by being stupid. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that used to make me feel hopeful. Now it just illuminated the dust motes floating above Harold's breakfast tray, like tiny witnesses to our charade. I set down his oatmeal, the lumpy institutional kind he claimed was all he could manage, and watched him perform his daily show. "Thank you, sweetheart." He wheezed, letting his left hand shake as he reached for the spoon. The same left hand that had been perfectly steady when he'd signed those insurance papers I supposedly hadn't been paying attention to. "You're welcome, honey." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the gesture automatic after months of caregiving. His skin felt warm, healthy, not like a man who'd suffered a massive stroke. "I'll be running some errands this morning. Kevin said he'd check on you around lunch." Harold's eyes flicked up to mine, and for just a moment, I saw calculation there. Sharp predatory intelligence masquerading as confusion. Errands. Just the usual. Pharmacy, grocery store. Maybe stop by the library. I kept my voice light casual, the same tone I'd used for 34 years of marriage when discussing mundane domestic details. The new Stephen King book came in. He nodded, already losing interest. Why would he care about his wife's boring little routine tomorrow night after all my routines would be permanently interrupted? I kissed his forehead, another automatic gesture, and left him to his performance. But instead of heading downstairs to clean up the kitchen, I slipped into our bedroom closet and pulled out the small suitcase I'd packed at 3 a.m, while Harold slept the peaceful sleep of a man with a clear conscience. The Riverside Public Library sat on the corner of Main and Elm, a brick building that had been my sanctuary since childhood. Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, greeted me with the same warm smile she'd worn for the past 20 years. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 2 hours on their public computers last night learning things that made my blood run cold. "Linda dear, how's Harold feeling?" "Oh, good days and bad days." I settled into my usual spot at the computer terminal in the corner, away from curious eyes. "I'm doing some research on stroke recovery, trying to understand his condition better." Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically and bustled away, leaving me alone with Google and a growing sense of dread. Harold Brennan plus previous wives plus obituaries. The search results filled the screen like accusations. Carol Brennan, deceased, 1987, age 36. Cause of death, accidental drowning in bathtub. Margaret Brennan, deceased, 1999, age 42. Cause of death, fatal fall downstairs. 2 wives, 2 accidents, 2 life insurance payouts that had funded Harold's comfortable lifestyle until he'd found me the lonely widow with a small inheritance and plenty of trust. My hands trembled as I clicked through the newspaper archives. Carol's obituary mentioned her loving husband Harold and stepson Kevin. Margaret's obituary said the same thing. Both women had died within 18 months of marrying Harold. Both had recently increased their life insurance policies. I was wife number 3 and my expiration date was tonight. The computer screen blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them away. There would be time for crying later. Right now, I needed to be a detective. Harold Brennan plus insurance claims plus investigations. More results. An article from 1999 mentioned that police had briefly investigated Margaret's death due to irregularities in the life insurance timeline. But the case was closed when Harold provided medical documentation showing Margaret's increasing depression and clumsiness in the months before her death. Medical documentation. Forged, no doubt, just like whatever papers he'd used to convince doctors that his own stroke was real. I printed everything: obituaries, insurance records, news articles. The library's ancient printer wheezed and groaned, but it produced clear copies that I folded carefully into my purse. Evidence. Harold had taught me to be thorough with paperwork over the years. He probably regretted that lesson now. My next stop was Dr. Morrison's office. Harold's neurologist was a kind man in his 50s who'd been treating my husband's condition for 6 months. I'd sat through every appointment holding Harold's hand while Dr. Morrison explained brain scans and recovery timelines with the patience of someone accustomed to confused family members. Mrs. Brennan, what a pleasant surprise. Dr. Morrison's receptionist, a woman about my age with kind eyes and efficient hands, looked up from her computer. "Harold's appointment isn't until next week." "I know, Janet. I was hoping to speak with Dr. Morrison about Harold's medications. I've been having some concerns." She studied my face with the sharp attention of someone who'd seen plenty of worried wives. "Let me check if he has a few minutes." Dr. Morrison emerged from his office 5 minutes later, still wearing his white coat and the expression of professional concern that had become familiar over the past months. "Linda, come in. What's troubling you?" I settled into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd received Harold's devastating diagnosis 6 months ago, the same chair where I'd cried and asked what I could do to help my husband recover. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I pulled the printed articles from my purse and set them on his desk. "Is it possible for someone to fake a stroke?" Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced at the papers, then back at my face. "That's an unusual question." "Why do you ask?" "Because I think my husband has been lying to both of us." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything. The baby monitor conversation, the insurance policies, the pattern of dead wives. Dr. Morrison listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Linda," he said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, Harold has fooled not just you, but an entire medical team. His brain scans show clear evidence of stroke damage. Could those scans belong to someone else?" Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his computer and began typing. "Let me pull up Harold's file." I watched his face as he scrolled through screens of medical data. His frown deepened with each page. "This is troubling," he said finally. "Linda, I need to ask you something. Has Harold ever mentioned having a twin brother?" My blood went cold. "No, why?" "Because the fingerprints we have on file don't match the ones we took during his last appointment. I thought it was a clerical error, but now—" He turned the computer screen toward me. "These brain scans were taken 6 months ago when Harold first came to see me. But the fingerprints from last week's appointment belong to someone else entirely. Twin brother, of course." Harold had mentioned having a brother once years ago, but claimed they'd been estranged since childhood. A brother who'd probably died young, leaving behind medical records that Harold could borrow when needed. "Dr. Morrison, what do I do?" He leaned back in his chair, his face grave. "First, you don't go home tonight. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" I nodded. My sister Carol lived an hour away. We'd grown apart over the years, mostly because Harold didn't like her, but she'd take me in. "Second, we call the police. What you've described constitutes fraud, at minimum possibly attempted murder." They won't believe me. Harold's a respected member of the community. He volunteers at the church coach's Little League. Everyone loves him. Linda serial killers are often charming. That's how they succeed. Dr. Morrison reached for his phone. "I'm calling Detective Sarah Chen. She specializes in financial crimes. If anyone can help you, it's her." Detective Chen arrived within an hour, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel instantly safer. She listened to my story with the same professional attention Dr. Morrison had shown, taking notes in a small black notebook. "Mrs. Brennan, what you're describing is a complex pattern of premeditated murder, but proving it will require evidence, and evidence requires risk." "What kind of risk?" "We need Harold to incriminate himself, which means you need to go home tonight and act normal while wearing a wire." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "You want me to let them try to kill me?" "We want you to let them think they're going to kill you. There's a difference." Detective Chen leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Linda, we'll have officers positioned around your house. The moment Harold makes any move toward violence, we'll intervene. But we need him to confess his plans on tape in his own words." I thought about Carol and Margaret Harold's first 2 wives, who'd trusted him right up until the moment they died. I thought about Kevin waiting upstairs for his inheritance. I thought about the baby monitor that had accidentally saved my life. "What do I have to do?" The wire was smaller than I'd expected, a tiny recording device taped between my shoulder blades and hidden beneath my favorite blue cardigan. Detective Chen had assured me it was undetectable, but I felt like I was wearing a neon sign that flashed "Police Informant" with every breath. "Remember," she said, adjusting the small earpiece that would allow us to communicate, "act natural. If Harold becomes suspicious, abort the mission immediately. Your safety is more important than any confession." I nodded, though natural felt like a foreign concept. How was I supposed to act normal while waiting for my husband to murder me? The drive home took forever and no time at all. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, and I had to consciously remind myself to breathe. The familiar sight of our house, white colonial with black shutters, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, made my stomach churn. Harold was in his wheelchair in the living room when I entered, positioned perfectly to see the front door. His performance was flawless, the slight droop to his mouth, the careful way he held his left arm, the confused blink when he saw me. "Linda, you were gone so long." "Sorry, honey. Ran into Mrs. Patterson at the library. You know how she likes to chat." I kissed his cheek, noting how his skin smelled faintly of cologne. Strange, since he claimed bathing was difficult these days. Kevin emerged from the kitchen carrying a glass of water, his timing so perfect it had to be rehearsed. "Hey, Mom Linda, how was your day?" Mom Linda. He'd never called me that before the past 6 months, just another part of his performance as the devoted stepson. Fine dear, just the usual errands. I hung my purse on the hook by the door, my movements careful and natural. The weight of the recording device felt enormous, but Kevin showed no signs of suspicion. "I was thinking we should have an early dinner tonight," Kevin said, settling onto the couch with the casual air of someone making innocent conversation. "Maybe order pizza. I know it's not your usual thing, but Dad seems tired today. Early dinner. Of course. They wanted to move up the timeline probably because Harold was getting restless playing invalid. I felt the tiny earpiece crackle to life Detective Chen's voice, barely audible. Go with it. We're ready. Pizza sounds perfect. You know I'm not much of a cook anyway. The lie rolled off my tongue easily. I'd been cooking elaborate meals for Harold for 6 months, meals he claimed were too difficult to chew, but somehow managed to finish every bite of when he thought I wasn't looking. The next 2 hours passed like a fever dream. Kevin ordered pizza from Antonio's, the same place we'd been getting pizza for years. Harold continued his act, struggling to hold his slice with his weakened left hand. We talked about the weather, about the neighbors, about anything except the fact that they planned to kill me before bedtime. At 8:30, Kevin stretched and yawned with theatrical precision. You know what, Dad? You look really tired tonight. Maybe Mom Linda should get your evening medication early. Good idea. Harold wheezed, though his eyes were sharp as winter ice. The pain, it's been bad today. This was it. The moment they'd planned. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like water. Of course, honey, let me get your pills. The stairs stretched above me like a mountain. 14 steps I'd climbed thousands of times, now transformed into an execution platform. Behind me, I could hear Kevin and Harold having a whispered conversation, their voices too low for the recording device to pick up clearly. Can you hear me? I whispered as I reached the landing. We hear you. Detective Chen's voice crackled through the earpiece. 2 officers are positioned at the back door, 2 more at the front. You're safe, Linda. Safe. The word felt foreign as I walked toward Harold's bedroom. The water they'd mentioned was already there, a dark stain spreading across the hardwood floor outside the bathroom door, strategically placed to make the stairs treacherous. I opened Harold's medication bottle, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 34 years of marriage had taught me to keep my hands steady when everything else was falling apart. Harold, I called down the stairs. Do you want the white pills or the blue ones? Both, came the reply. The pain is really severe tonight. Both pills. They wanted me to come down those stairs carrying both hands full, making it impossible to catch myself when I slipped on their strategically placed water. I descended the stairs, slowly gripping the banister with my left hand while balancing the pill bottles in my right. Kevin was positioned perfectly at the bottom, ready to witness my tragic accident. Harold sat in his wheelchair with an expression of concerned love that might have fooled me if I hadn't known better. Here you go, sweetheart. I handed Harold his pills and turned back toward the stairs. This was the moment. They expected me to slip to fall to break my neck on the beautiful oak steps Harold had refinished with such pride. Instead, I sat down on the 3rd step and pulled out my phone. Linda. Kevin's voice carried a note of confusion. What are you doing? I'm calling 911, I said, calmly pressing the numbers with steady fingers. I'm reporting an attempted murder. The silence that followed was profound. Harold stopped pretending to struggle with his pills. Kevin's helpful expression melted away like wax in sunlight. What are you talking about? Harold demanded, and his voice was strong now, clear the voice of a man who'd never had a stroke in his life. I'm talking about Carol and Margaret and the insurance policies and the baby monitor you forgot about when you were planning my death last night. Harold's face went white. Kevin took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists, but I held up my phone. I wouldn't, Kevin. Detective Chen and 4 officers are listening to every word. They've been listening all evening. Mom Linda, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a murderer, Kevin. And your father is a serial killer who's been collecting life insurance money from dead wives for 30 years. Harold lurched out of his wheelchair with the fluid grace of a man who'd never been paralyzed. You stupid bitch. You should have just died quietly like the others. The others fought back too, didn't they? That's why you had to be so careful with the staging. Carol didn't just slip in the bathtub. Margaret didn't just fall down the stairs. You had to force them. They were worthless, Harold snarled, advancing toward me. Just like you, taking up space, spending my money thinking they mattered. The front door exploded inward. Detective Chen and 3 officers flooded into the living room with weapons drawn their shouts, filling the space where my quiet domestic life had just been shattered forever. Harold Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Kevin Brennan, you're under arrest as an accessory. Kevin tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. 2 officers had him face down on the carpet within seconds, his hands cuffed behind his back. Harold stood frozen in the middle of the room, his mask finally stripped away completely. You have the right to remain silent. Detective Chen continued, but Harold wasn't silent. She's nothing, he screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. A fat, useless old woman. I made her life better. I gave her purpose. Purpose. I looked around the living room where I'd spent 6 months caring for a man who'd been planning my death from the moment I'd signed the marriage certificate. The room felt smaller now, shabby like a stage set after the play was over. Linda. Detective Chen's voice was gentle as she approached me. You did good. You got everything we needed. I nodded, though I couldn't quite feel my body. Shock, probably. The kind that comes when your entire reality shifts in the space of a heartbeat. What happens now? Now we investigate. Carol and Margaret's cases will be reopened. We'll dig into Harold's finances, his medical records, everything. You've given their families a chance at justice. Justice. It was a word I'd never thought much about before. It seemed too big for ordinary people like me, reserved for courtrooms and lawyers and cases you read about in the newspaper. But as I watched Harold and Kevin being led away in handcuffs, justice felt personal, intimate, like something you could hold in your hands. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and institutional fear, watching Harold's defense attorney try to convince 12 strangers that my husband was the victim of an elaborate frame-up. The lawyer was young, expensive-looking, with the kind of confident smile that probably worked well with juries who hadn't heard Harold planning their client's murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the attorney said, pacing in front of the witness box where I'd spent 2 days telling my story. My client is a man who suffered a debilitating stroke, a man whose mind has been compromised, a man who was manipulated by his own son into saying things he didn't understand. I almost laughed. Harold manipulated. The man who'd convinced 3 women to marry him to trust him to sign insurance papers that would fund their own funerals. But I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded in my lap like the respectable widow I was supposed to be. Detective Chen had warned me about this. Defense attorneys will try to make you the villain, she'd said. They'll claim you're a gold digger, a manipulative older woman who trapped a vulnerable man. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and remember that the evidence speaks for itself. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 months of investigation had uncovered a paper trail that stretched back 30 years. Forged medical records, insurance fraud, and most damning of all, the body of Harold's twin brother, Dennis, discovered buried in Harold's first wife's garden. Dennis had died of natural causes in 1985, but Harold had kept his medical records, using them whenever he needed to play sick. Mrs. Brennan, the defense attorney said, turning his attention to me, isn't it true that you admitted to Dr. Morrison that you'd been suspicious of your husband's condition for months? Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I thought something was wrong. I just didn't know what. So you were actively looking for reasons to doubt Harold's medical condition. I was looking for ways to help him get better. Help him get better or help yourself get access to his finances? The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Torres, rose from her seat. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, counselor. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, the suggestion that I was somehow complicit in my own attempted murder. It was a strategy I'd seen in countless legal dramas, but experiencing it firsthand felt like being flayed alive. The defense attorney continued his assault for another hour, questioning my motives, my memory, my competence. By the time he finished, I felt like a criminal instead of a victim. But then Amanda Torres stood up for redirect examination, and her first question restored my faith in the justice system. Mrs. Brennan, if you were after Harold's money, why did you call the police instead of letting the murder attempt proceed and claiming his life insurance? It was such a simple question, so obvious, that I wondered why the defense hadn't considered it. If I'd been the manipulative gold digger they claimed, I would have let Harold kill me and taken the insurance money. The fact that I'd prevented my own murder proved my innocence more clearly than any character witness could. Because I didn't want to die, I said simply, and I didn't want other women to die either. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I listened to testimony from Carol's sister, who'd always suspected something was wrong with her death. Margaret's daughter testified about her mother's sudden personality change in the months before she died, how Margaret had become clumsy and forgetful symptoms that now made sense in the context of being slowly poisoned. Dr. Morrison explained how Harold had used his brother's medical records to fake his stroke-switching fingerprints and manipulating test results with the help of a corrupt technician who'd since been arrested. The technician had been paid $50,000 for each forged report money that came from Carol's and Margaret's life insurance policies. Kevin testified against his father in exchange for a reduced sentence, describing Harold's elaborate planning process, his careful study of each wife's routines, his patience in waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kevin's testimony was clinical matter-of-fact, as if he were describing a business plan rather than multiple murders. He said women were easy to control. Kevin told the jury, his voice flat and emotionless. You just had to find their weakness and exploit it. Linda's weakness was that she wanted to be needed. Wanted to be needed. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, because it was true. After Harold's first wife died and I'd moved in to help with his grief, I'd felt useful, important, necessary. It was the same feeling I'd had while caring for his supposed stroke, the satisfaction of being indispensable. Harold had seen that need and weaponized it. But the prosecution's most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source, Harold himself. During his arrest, while high on adrenaline and rage, he'd confessed everything to the officers transporting him to jail. The confession was recorded, and when they played it in court, Harold's voice filled the room like a ghost, testifying from beyond the grave. "Stupid women," his recorded voice said. "They all thought they were so smart, but they were just cattle. Carol thought she could threaten to leave me. Margaret thought she could hide money from me. Linda thought she could spy on me. But I always knew. I always had the last word." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim but certain. Guilty on all counts, 3 counts of first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and elder abuse. Harold showed no emotion when the verdict was read, but I saw his hands tremble slightly as the bailiff led him away. For the first time in 30 years, Harold Brennan was truly powerless. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Kevin received 25 years as an accessory to murder. Justice had been served, but it felt different than I'd expected. Not triumphant, just final. After the trial, I stood on the courthouse steps in the October sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in months. Amanda Torres joined me, her expression satisfied but somber. "How do you feel?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Grateful," I said finally, "and guilty." "Guilty, Linda, you're the victim here." "I know, but I keep thinking about Carol and Margaret. If I'd been smarter, if I'd figured it out sooner, maybe they'd still be alive." Amanda shook her head. "You can't save people retroactively, but you can save people going forward." She was right, of course. But that didn't make the weight of survival any easier to bear. 1 year after Harold's conviction, I stood in the living room of the Riverside Women's Shelter, watching 15 women between the ages of 45 and 75 learn how to recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. The shelter occupied the building that had once housed First National Bank, its high ceilings and marble floors now echoing with the voices of survivors instead of commercial transactions. "The most important thing to remember," I told the group, "is that love doesn't require you to sign legal documents. Real partners discuss major financial decisions. They don't manipulate you into signing papers while you're distracted or emotional." A woman named Patricia raised her hand. She was about my age with silver hair and the kind of expensive jewelry that spoke of recent wealth. But what if you trust them? What if they've never given you a reason to doubt them? Then you verify anyway, I replied. Trust but verify isn't just for international diplomacy. It's for anyone who asks you to put their name on your bank account or change your will. Patricia nodded, making notes in the notebook every participant received. The notebooks were part of the Harold Brennan Memorial Education Fund, a name I'd chosen with deliberate irony. Harold's memory would serve the women he'd tried to destroy, teaching them to protect themselves from men exactly like him. The fund had grown larger than I'd expected. Carol's sister had donated her portion of Harold's restitution payments. Margaret's daughter had contributed the proceeds from selling Harold's classic car collection. Even some of Harold's prison pen pals, women who'd written to him after the trial, had donated money once they learned the truth about his crimes. "Mrs. Brennan," said another participant, "what made you finally realize what was happening?" It was a question I'd answered hundreds of times over the past year, in interviews, at conferences, and meetings with legislators who were drafting new elder protection laws. But the answer never got easier. Technology, I said. A baby monitor that I bought for the wrong reasons, used in the wrong place, that accidentally saved my life. But the real answer is that I finally listened to my instincts instead of my guilt. After the session ended, I walked the participants to their cars, a habit I'd developed over the months of running these workshops. Too many women had learned to be afraid of parking lots, of walking alone, of being vulnerable in spaces where predators might be waiting. Detective Chen was waiting by my car when I came outside, her expression serious, but not urgent. We developed a friendship over the past year, bonded by the shared experience of seeing how quickly ordinary life could become extraordinary danger. "Linda," she said, "we need to talk." My stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Something's right, actually. We got a call from the FBI. Harold's case has opened up a federal investigation into elder abuse networks. They want you to consult on similar cases." I leaned against my car, feeling the weight of the year settling over me like a familiar coat. The counseling sessions, the legal meetings, the media interviews, it had all been leading to this moment, to the choice between returning to my quiet life or stepping further into the role I'd never asked for. What kind of consulting? Training law enforcement officers to recognize the signs, helping other victims prepare for trial, maybe testifying before Congress about the gaps in current elder protection laws. Congress. A year ago, I'd been afraid to use a smartphone. Now they wanted me to address the most powerful legislative body in the country. "I'll think about it," I said. "Take your time." But Linda, you're good at this. You have a gift for helping people see clearly, for cutting through the manipulation and getting to the truth. Don't let that gift go to waste. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, a bright modern space with excellent security and no history of fake medical emergencies, reading letters from women who'd attended my workshops. Some had left abusive relationships. Others had avoided financial scams. A few had reported suspicious behavior to authorities, potentially saving lives. One letter particularly moved me. It was from a woman named Helen, whose daughter had been pressuring her to sign over power of attorney. After attending my workshop, Helen had consulted with an attorney and discovered that her daughter had already forged several documents. The daughter was now facing fraud charges, and Helen was safe. "You taught me that being suspicious isn't the same as being unloving," Helen had written. "You can protect yourself and still be a good mother. Thank you for showing me that survival isn't selfish." Survival isn't selfish. I read the phrase again, feeling its truth settle into my bones like medicine. My phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister Carol's number. "Hey, stranger," she said when I answered. "How are you holding up?" "Good days and bad days." It was the same phrase I'd used to describe Harold's fake recovery, but now it applied to my real healing. "Mostly good lately. I saw you on the news last week. That interview about the new legislation. You looked strong." Strong. It was a word people had been using to describe me lately, though I still felt like the same frightened woman who discovered her husband's murder plot through a baby monitor. Maybe strength wasn't about feeling brave all the time. Maybe it was about acting despite the fear. Carol, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Mom would be proud of me? Our mother had died 10 years earlier before the trial, before I'd become someone who spoke at conferences and advised federal investigators. She'd been a traditional woman, the kind who believed wives should support their husbands unconditionally. Honey. Carol said, her voice warm with certainty. Mom would be proud that you survived. Everything else is just bonus. After we hung up, I walked to my kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. The kitchen was small, efficient, nothing like the sprawling space where I'd cooked meals for a man who'd been planning my death. But it was mine, purchased with my own money, safe from manipulation and lies. On the refrigerator was a photo from the dedication ceremony for the Harold Brennan Memorial Education Fund. 15 women, all survivors, all learning to trust their instincts instead of their guilt. In the photo, we looked like what we were, a sisterhood forged by shared trauma and mutual protection. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart rate spiked, old habits from the months when every unexpected contact felt like a threat. But the message was from a woman named Susan in Phoenix, asking if I could recommend resources for her mother who was being pressured to change her will by a new boyfriend. I typed back quickly, providing phone numbers for legal aid and elder protection services. It was a small thing helping one woman protect one mother, but small things accumulated into large changes. Carol and Margaret were gone, but other women could be saved. The kettle whistled, pulling me back to the present moment. I poured hot water over the chamomile tea bag, breathing in the scent of flowers and peace. Outside my window, Riverside went about its evening routine, families sharing dinner, couples walking dogs, neighbors chatting over backyard fences. Ordinary life, the kind I'd once taken for granted. But I wasn't ordinary anymore, and that was okay. Harold had tried to make me a victim, a statistic, a cautionary tale. Instead, he'd accidentally created something far more dangerous, a woman who couldn't be fooled twice. Tomorrow, I would call Detective Chen and accept the FBI consulting position. Tomorrow, I would begin the next chapter of a life I'd never planned but was learning to embrace. Tomorrow, I would continue the work of turning Harold's legacy of death into something that created life. But tonight, I would drink my tea and read my book and exist in the simple pleasure of being alive, of being safe, of being free to choose my own ending. The baby monitor that had saved my life sat on my bookshelf, now a silent reminder of how accidentally our salvation sometimes arrives. Next to it was a framed copy of Harold's conviction notice, not as a trophy, but as proof that justice, however delayed, was still possible. I raised my teacup in a small private toast to Carol and Margaret, to women I'd never met, but whose deaths had meaning now, whose stories had finally been told. Thank you. I whispered to the empty apartment, to the listening darkness, to the future I was finally free to write for myself. Outside, the October wind rustled through the trees, carrying the promise of winter and renewal. I wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. I'd learned that survival generated its own warmth, that strength could be cultivated like a garden, that even broken trust could bloom into something beautiful. I was 65 years old and my life was just beginning.